Hey everyone, this is a video on section 4.9, barriers to economic growth and/or economic development. In this one, we're just going to look at economic barriers to growth and development. First, we need to look at what a poverty cycle is. We're going to sort of refer back to this diagram later, so I'll just go through how it works. Poor countries, undeveloped countries, they have low incomes. I think we all understand that. What this leads to is low savings. They have to spend everything they earn. They can't afford to put money away in savings. This lack of savings means that there isn't a bank of savings there to invest. So firms have trouble investing in physical capital, and individuals, families, they don't have the money to invest in their own human capital either. And natural capital also gets neglected. So what happens is we get this low productivity of labour and land. So we don't get much economic activity coming. This leads to low growth in incomes. And if we're not growing from our low incomes, it just takes us right back to the start, to the low incomes. It's a perpetuating cycle. We need to find ways to break that cycle. Escape the trap. So the first economic barrier we're going to look at is rising income inequality. As you know, we've seen the Lorenz curve before. Now, how does inequality limit growth and development? Well, the low income earners, and there's going to be a lot of them when there's such unequal income, they can't invest in themselves, invest in their own capital to make themselves better off, and therefore that doesn't happen across the economy. We get low growth. The wealthy few, they make a lot of the incomes, but they have a low marginal propensity to consume. So they might save a lot, or they might spend more likely on imports, which are likely to be the luxury goods that the wealthy can afford, and those in these undeveloped countries, they tend to be in the form of imports, those luxury goods. We've also found that the wealthy few can have significant political power, and that tends not to be good for development outcomes. Limited access to infrastructure is another barrier. So firstly, how does that help? How would infrastructure help? They get increase in trade, more access to ports, things like rail, getting goods out to sea through the ports can lower production costs and make it more internationally competitive. When you get increased foreign direct investment, the multinationals, the companies that are going to do the foreign direct investment, they want lower costs, and they want to be able to take the goods that they are producing there and get them out of the country for export. So the infrastructure is going to help them do that. Health and education, if we invest in schools and hospitals, then they then exist and people can increase their human capital in that way. Why is it actually limited? Money. Money is a big issue here. They've got a low tax revenue base because they've got low incomes in the country. And they've also got less ability to charge for the use of the infrastructure. So things like water, electricity, they often have to provide that below cost, which means that they don't get the return on that to further invest in more infrastructure. And due to the lack of tax money, there's also inadequate maintenance, so this infrastructure can degrade over time. And limited access by the poor, generally, because of that large political influence we talked about before with inequality, that can lead to the infrastructure not going to where it's most needed. So it might service just the richer communities who have that political influence. Limited access to appropriate technology. So appropriate technology, that's which well suited to particular economic, geographical, ecological, and climate conditions. So how it can help is that appropriate technology can help break this poverty cycle. So with the physical capital here, the technology can increase the productivity of labour and land, can lead to higher growth in income, higher incomes, and then that cycle can continue on perhaps. Now, why don't we have appropriate technology? Money. You're going to see this one a bit, that little picture. They're unable to afford the technology, perhaps. They often have to buy that from overseas. They don't have those developed industries in their own countries. And again, they may not be able to develop those technologies in their countries. They don't have the established industries. And some of the technology can be labour replacing rather than labour using, because if it's coming from a developed country, whereas these countries, they still need people in work. So labour using technologies can be much more appropriate. It can be harder to find the most appropriate technologies. And they also have different climate conditions. We'll revisit this later, but most of them, developing countries, are in tropical and subtropical environments, which are different to most of the developed countries in the world. We've got low levels of human capital, so education. We've talked about human capital a little bit. That's a definition there. How can education help growth and development? It can lead to more productivity, higher quality of resources. That can lead to international competitiveness, so we can sell more exports, right? Bring in money that way. We can substitute imports. If we have a more educated workforce, we can develop our own goods that can compete with the imports. So we don't have so much money leaving the country, we can compete ourselves. And the development of technology, education can clearly lead to that. Jobs, therefore income. And what we see when we have jobs and we have the competitiveness, etc., we have tax revenues. Those tax revenues can be used to fund all the things that these developing countries are lacking, the education, the health, the infrastructure. Another way that education can help is by having more gender equality. Education is a great leveler in that way. Of course, that assumes that girls can be educated in that country. Not always a safe assumption. How can education help? Again, the foreign direct investment by multinational firms that can act as I like this picture that I made, by the way, of a magnet drawing in money. So multinationals, they can take advantage of an educated workforce because they're going to be better at their job. So that's going to be a bit of a draw card for the multinationals to invest in the country. That can bring in tax revenue. It can also bring in some technology. We get technology transfer when we get the FDI, and we get the expertise. So these multinationals, they come in and we learn, the developing countries learn their methods and techniques and can boost the human capital in the home country. And education can also lead to improved health outcomes, reduced spread of disease, people having greater understanding of their bodies, and we can get more qualified medical professionals in the country. Okay, why are there low levels of education? Oh, big surprise, no money. So that tax revenue base, not there. Sometimes it's just the allocation of the proportion of the budget allocated to education. We've seen in the data that the income of a country it's correlated to the levels of education, but it's not a perfect correlation. Some poorer countries can do much better in education, and that's partly because of how they allocate their budgetary resources. And of course, low household incomes make it hard for people to invest in themselves, their own education. There can also be gender discrimination. This is a picture of an Afghan primary school. Now, in Afghanistan, these girls are now not allowed to go to high school. So that's an extreme example, but there are often biases that stop girls from getting the full education that they should be getting. And some of these countries, there can be a large distance from home to school, which can make it very difficult. Not everyone has cars. Sometimes children are walking for hours a day. It can be very difficult. Okay, and health. How can health help growth and development? Higher productivity. We get lower birth rates if people understand contraception and have access to contraception, which is largely considered healthcare. And if we have those lower birth rates, we can invest more in the human capital. Families, if they've got fewer children, can invest more in the children that they do have to greater help them achieve a better life. So they can invest in their health and education. Why are there low levels of health in these countries? Lack of money, big surprise. So insufficient funding. For example, 37% of Africans do not receive medical treatment due to the high cost. So it's just not accessible to a lot of people. Distance from medical care, like it was with schools, can be an issue. And this is a broader issue, but a lack of access to clean water and sanitation. So the lack of infrastructure can cause there to be a lack of health in the country. Okay, we can have in these developing countries a dependence on primary sector production, so primary commodities. So we've got a little table here. This shows commodities as a share of total exports. So here, Bolivia, 95% of their exports are commodities. This is a small list of countries, but if I had a longer list, a lot of the numbers would be quite similar. And within that, even just a reliance on one commodity. So oil for Chad, 92% of their exports, or 92% of their commodities. So a high percentage. Oh, that's the light gone off. Venezuela, 81%, just on oil. So again, similar story across multiple countries. Now, commodities, they tend to have a low PED value and a low PES value. We're going to see why this is a bit of a problem. So they have a low PED value because they are necessities, and they don't have close substitutes. So these things that they sell, everyone needs them, and there's no close substitute, so they have inelastic demand, and they have inelastic supply as well, because there is a long production time for these things, and often to produce more you need to spend a lot of money. So that can stop supply being so responsive to an increase in price, if there is one. Okay, why is this a problem? We get volatile prices. So we can see here, if we've got inelastic demand and supply shifts, price changes quite a lot. If we've got inelastic supply and demand shifts, price changes quite a lot. So volatile export earnings can lead to volatile current account balances and volatile levels of government tax revenues. So if governments can't rely on revenue from year to year, they're going to stop spending to an extent. Okay, to illustrate this, this is the yearly volatility of some of these commodities. So coffee, 25%. The price of coffee could change 25% year to year, quite a lot.